Of course, actors can do nothing without writers. I consider myself amazingly fortunate to talk to my ex-boss, who, one of the joyful times of my life has been doing the show Succession. And I'm very lucky to be able to talk to the writer and creator, Jesse Armstrong, who's here now. Jesse, thank you.
Oh, not at all, Brian. It's a pleasure to be with you.
No, great. So I just want to kick this off because it's just the whole business of the writing process. How do you envisage the relationship between writer and actors?
Well, this is a good one. I think we could talk. We could run and run on that. It's a relationship that gets invented every time, right? And your relationship, even with the different writers on Succession, was probably different, and my relationship to each of the actors on Succession, who've got their different styles and methods, it is different with each one. So there are constants. I'm very happy to meet an actor in their, well, I think I am, in the place where they're comfortable to talk. And you've worked with, some people like to talk a lot to the writer.
We know that.
And some people don't.
We also know that.
And you've got to be willing to do both. And I think the ideal setup is the one in which the writer is in quite intimate contact with the actors.
Yeah.
As we've said, the writers certainly get no instruction manual, and I think that's something of a problem, in that you must have come across wildly different levels of ability in writers to talk to actors.
Yeah.
I've seen directors and actors. Directors also don't get a playbook.
Directors are another problem. That's another problem which we could talk about. But I think, and from my point of view, where I think I was lucky and where I deem myself incredibly lucky is the fact that I spent my early years in the theatre, where the writer was sacrosanct. You know, there was no way of getting around that. The writer was it. And actually, ironically, it was liberating. It was liberating when you know what the writer wants. Then there are certain variations to that want. There are certain kind of little canyons, little niches of that want. It's not just one solid want. It's much more organic and much more easy to embrace. And again, it's all about depth. It's all about the ability to be as deep as they can be, and they are. They will go there. That's what I love about writers. They will go there, you know. And I found that, for me, when I come to a script like Succession, that's my training. That's where I come to, because I go, oh yeah, I know where I am here. It's about the writer. And that's what I find liberating.
Well, you're kind about writers and writing there. I think one of the couple of things I pick up on from there, which I've probably been a beneficiary without knowing, is because you have that background and relationship to the writing, it engenders a huge amount of trust, right? You as an actor, you're placing your trust in the writer and saying, I believe this piece, I trust this piece, and now here's my work. Yeah. And that way, for a writer, is an incredibly appealing place to begin with, right? But if the actor's performance is saying, I believe this is true, but look, I could do it like this, I wonder whether there's this nuance in it, is a good place for both of those notes on the other person's craft to come from, of trust.
Yeah, if we could just take this one step further, what's your ideal of the mix of writing and interpretation playing out? And is there a scene, say, that you could suggest from Succession that sort of illustrates that?
What we do every day is we come in with a set of, with the scene or scenes, and we have, all in our own minds, probably a version of the scene, and then we hit reality, and sometimes you feel you're not getting what you thought the scene was, and a writer can find it very surprising. I thought this was just this little scene about Logan complaining that there's too much pizza being eaten in the ATN kitchen, and it opens up before you and you realise that maybe you knew more than you thought you knew when you were writing, or the actors are telling you these characters are more capacious than you thought they were, and we can go this way and that way with it, and that's very exciting.
That's right.
And then other times you've written this quote, you think you've written this wonderful scene, and it's like one of those cakes in the oven that doesn't rise. I think all you can do in those moments is trust and throw a few limited elements up in the air and see what helps, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's the physicality. It's often the physicality.
Yeah. I think that's right. It's usually about physical positioning. It's usually we're in the wrong place, and the director has put us in the wrong place, and that's usually why the scene isn't working. Not because we're not there or you're not there. It's because he or she has decided to do that, and you go, that isn't really going to help the scene that we know is a tricky one, but we knew how to work it orally. We could make it work very, very well. Therefore, physically, we've got to do the same. Then that's up to the director to get to where she or he puts in her tuppenny halfpenny worth, Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's strange how often it's something in the room, in that physical positioning, which makes you feel this doesn't feel real, doesn't feel right.
That's right. The great thing about our show was it was so informed that you knew there was just a kind of this huge wall of trust behind you all the way through, and that anything was possible within the context of whatever we were doing. And so much of the time that is not there, it's not present in a lot of the work situations, because there's a sort of fundamental thing that's missing, which is to do about the trust of the relationship to the guide or the guys and gals who've actually written the material.
But how do you cope with it, Brian? Because hopefully there's a level of trust from the actors that this is a true piece that has depth to it. Everyone won't always be working in those situations. How do you work when there's doubts in your mind about the depth of the work, about the notes from the director or the writer?
You have to go back to your own skill set. You just have to go back to your skill set in terms of your skill set as an actor. When you lose trust, you have to find another element that sustains you through what the work is. And that's not difficult. It really isn't. I mean, with years of experience, one has learned to do that. And you have to somehow find a way of dealing and making it work. You've got to cut the mustard. You can't pretend. You just got to cut it, and you've got to come into it, and you've got to come with something which has a wholesome element to it. And that's where one skill set comes into play, of how I deal with this different problem from these different people. I go, okay, this is a difficulty. I can't condemn him, even though I think he's being bloody ignorant. But I have to find a way of just saying, because I've got to make it happen. And I've got to make it happen now.
I feel like I've sometimes seen that with actors, and it sometimes feels like an actor needs to imagine some trust in that moment, and that's all they're going to get. Mm-hmm. And they'll take that, and that will be my fuel. And it doesn't really matter if if your analysis is not good, if I don't outside this room, if I wouldn't trust you in this place. This is what I've got, and I'm going to go for it with this little bit of fuel. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right. At what point do you start to imagine or conjure up the sort of actor that you need for a role in that time?
It's a good question. I guess very occasionally, I want Brian Cox, and you write with that person in mind. I don't think that's ever bad, even in the event you can't
Certainly wasn't bad in my case. I'm not complaining.
Even in the event that you don't get Brian Cox, because he's busy, as can occasionally happen, I think having somebody in mind that you're writing for is not a bad thing. Other times you have, an agglomeration of maybe people you know in your own life, or types of people you've met, and that comes together in a fictional entity that then you try and cast towards. So it's a mixture. I think both can work. I know writers sometimes write with actors up on the wall just to try and make the thing more real, and I always encourage writers to do that, because making the thing feel real as you're writing is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And does that does the writing process change once you've cast the actor?
Yes. And I think one of the reasons I was happy to talk to you is because, we work together a lot. But
Yeah.
we often don't have those kind of
No, we don't.
basic conversations.
Because for 6 years we didn't have those conversations, which is extraordinary, really.
But to come back to your original question, which was about writing for a specific actor, I think that's the great advantage is you just get to know and feel confident and more confident about the places an actor will excel. And obviously we're both interested probably in pushing the borders wider and wider and seeing, how far can we go. But that confidence of I can write this for Brian or Jeremy or Sarah or Kieran, and they will, it sounds reductive, but just nail it.
Does that process change when the actor has performed the role over hours and, for hours in the role? Does that process change?
What you don't want is to get a very firm idea of what an actor is or what they can and can't do and write tightly towards that, because you're invariably wrong, right? We're all probably, the writer hopefully is more capacious and has got more in them than can sometimes be apparent, and certainly a good actor can do more than that narrow idea that a writer can get set. The thing one has to beware, as a writer, you can easily fall into the comfort zone. This is the dynamic that I know that these characters and these actors play well, and I'll write another version of that. The situation has changed, and now it plays out in that familiar way which we enjoy. And Logan gets angry and tells somebody to fuck off. Is that, and sometimes you want that, don't you? As the audience want that, the performers want that, everyone wants that, the perfect version of that. But there comes a danger of repetition. Logan Roy is this angry old bastard who can only be mean. And if you get too stuck in that rut, the actor will get bored, which is a problem, but probably not the biggest consideration, but the audience will get bored.
Absolutely. I mean, that was the great part of, that's the great thing about playing Logan was, for me, he grew to be the most misunderstood character on television, because I kept thinking, you think that, but actually, no, I'm thinking that, constantly. Of course, that's the genius of when you have a part like Logan, because it's open. There's a certain open entity to it.
I think that's right. I think there's two pleasures that strike me for an audience, especially watching a serialized TV show, is the pleasure of seeing a character people know react as the audience would expect them to a new situation. And that can be very enjoyable for the audience. But I think the even greater pleasure, and it's the one that maybe actors and writers can collaborate more on, is the character, a new situation arrives, and the character behaves in a way which is surprising, but everyone goes away thinking, of course, that's what they would do, and not have that feeling of like, why the hell did that happen?
I love the elements of the understated that was always there sometimes with Logan. And that, because from that point of view, one could build when it's understated, because you can fill in the areas where you think, maybe I can facilitate that moment in a different way. And that's what I loved about the role, because the role was endlessly adaptable in that sense. Endlessly, but it had a certain, it had scope, it had breadth, it had, it wasn't locked into a corner. It was, it was very much, three-dimensional, really. The fact that, and all the things that you did so brilliantly with the suggestion of the scars on the back and everything that was so just there, like delicately etched in and never overstated. That was the stuff, of course, that made me realize I know how I can play the role. I know where I can take the role because of those little vignettes. So much of it is unsaid, but it's all there. And that's the genius of the writing and the genius of what you guys created.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. And I think the thing that strikes me that would be useful for young or actors who are considering their craft, it's a lot of what you say seems obvious to you and you credit the writing, and hopefully the raw material is in there for you to work from, but a huge amount of that is work that you've done, sometimes instinctively and maybe intellectually, to find the things which make the character deeper than that surface reading. And if people don't have faith in the writing, or don't want to go to those places to explore it, I think that's maybe where you get a thinner interpretation and a less enjoyable one for the audience, because there's not as much truth or reality for them to investigate, right?
Absolutely, absolutely right. So what do you wish you'd known about actors when you first started out as a writer?
That's a great question. I think the thing I've learnt more and more is, a couple of times we've talked about fear, the fear of the actor that they're going to be given a note that is unhelpful, or be told in some way that they're doing it wrong, which is not what you need to hear. And the writer's fear that in the performance, the actor is going to reveal you to have written it wrong. You've done it wrong. This doesn't make sense. It's not true. And I think both those, acknowledging that there is that potential fear in both those key parties, and reducing that fear in both parties is key. And I think the thing I've learned about that is to try to be as honest as possible. And so the most useful thing I think I'd have learned earlier is to say, I don't know, trust me that I had an idea for this scene, but when you ask me that specific question, I don't know, and your answer is as good as mine. So being able to admit that, I think, is very useful.
And it's very honest when a writer says he doesn't know, or she says she doesn't know, because it's just happened. And I think that we do what we need to do, and what we should do as actors, is we should learn to trust that and say, that's fine, that's honest. They don't know, so let's discover what it is. And I think it's important to understand that it's legitimate to be questionable. It's legitimate to say, we don't know about that. We don't quite know. We don't quite understand why that is. It's just that I have a gut feeling. And then when you work on it, you then discover, I now find out what the reason is. I now see what it is. But it requires the work, and it requires the rehearsal, and it requires the attention to that problem. But we're not in the business of certainty at all.
No.
Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'd say the Brian Cox method of approaching a scene is to come into it prepared with a pretty comprehensive view of what's happening in the scene and what your approach is, what the character's angle is, to be committed to that. But I would say, magical extra element is to be open to changing it, to be able to say, okay, I'll try it, I'll go there. That's an incredibly valuable quality.
And I think it's the most important thing, because I think, especially doing it as long as I've been doing it, it's what you long for. It's what you long for, to be able to work out the problem. Nobody's definite. We're all sort of, there's a great element in what you do is suck it and see. There has to be. It's the nature of, it's that thing of when you dive off the diving board, you don't know if you're going to body flop or going to dive into the water. You're going, am I going to make this? And you usually do, But that's what's so interesting to me.
I don't know whether it's better that we had this conversation at the end than at the beginning, but it's fascinating to talk through all these things, the dynamics that we've been working with for years and years.
That we haven't been able to talk about, which is good. I mean, that's why I find this conversation very precious. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Brian.